My name is Lucas. I'm 26 years old. And what I'm about to tell you is exactly the kind of thing that divides life into before and after, even when you didn't ask for it. There are moments you just can't forget. Not because they were dramatic, not because someone shouted or slammed a door or said words that can't be taken back, but because they were silent, completely silent. And in the silence, something was said that can never be undone. This is that moment for me. It was the middle of the night. I don't know what time it was. I just know the apartment was dark, and I woke up for no reason. No bad dream, no noise, nothing. I just woke up. My eyes opened on their own, as if some part of my body knew something my head hadn't processed yet. I lay there for a few seconds, trying to understand what had pulled me out of sleep. A sliver of orange streetlight filtered through the window, that late-night glow that makes everything feel a bit unreal. The apartment was small, 2 bedrooms, and I could hear the silence of the place with a strange clarity. And then I realized it. I didn't hear anything, but I felt it. There's a difference between being alone in a room and being in a room with someone. Even in the dark, even in the silence, the air changes. The presence of another body occupies space in a way you feel before you see. I slowly turned my head. He was standing in the doorway of my bedroom. Mr. Antonio. 54 years old, broad shoulders, that posture of a man who never had to shrink in his life. Standing there, completely still, looking at me. There was no threat in what I saw. No anger. There was something much harder to name than anger. And that's exactly what kept me from sleeping until the sun came up. Our eyes met in the dim light. He didn't move. I didn't move. I don't know how many seconds passed. 5, 10, maybe less, maybe more. Time does strange things when something like this happens. Suddenly, without making a sound or a hint of a gesture, he turned his back and vanished into the darkness of the living room. I stayed there, staring at the ceiling. My heart was beating faster than it should for someone lying on a mattress. I tried to convince myself it was something practical. He needed to use the bathroom. He woke up disoriented. He wasn't really looking at me. I spent the rest of the night building reasonable explanations for what I'd seen. None of them worked. Because I know the difference between the look of someone who is disoriented and the look of someone who is completely present. And Mr. Antonio, my roommate's father, a cattle rancher, a volunteer deacon, a family man, a man of God, was completely present in that moment. He wasn't lost. He was looking at me. Have you ever woken up in the middle of the night and felt like something changed while you were asleep? That the world was one way before you closed your eyes and was different when you opened them? That's how I felt. Except I didn't quite understand what had changed yet. To understand what that moment meant and what came after, I need to tell you how we got here. I need to tell you who I am, who Henrique is, and how a man who should have been a stranger became someone I can't get out of my head. This story deserves to be told right. I've never been the type to go around explaining myself to people. I grew up in the countryside. I won't specify where because some stories carry different weight depending on where you are in the country, and the location matters less than what it represents. I grew up in a small town where everyone knew everyone, where Sunday was for mass, where masculinity had a specific shape, and anything outside that shape was treated as a mistake or a weakness. I learned early on to take up less space than I needed. The repression didn't happen like in the movies. No scandals, no physical violence, nothing explicit. The pressure was silent. It was years of looks judging my ways, conversations that died before they even started. It was me learning to tuck things away so deep that sometimes I even forgot they existed. When I was 22, I moved to the city. It wasn't a dramatic escape. It was practical. Work, opportunity, the course I wanted to take. But underneath the practical, there was a truth I knew but didn't say out loud. I needed space to exist in a way that just didn't fit in the place I came from. I ended up in a shared apartment out of financial necessity, and that's how I met Henrique. 27 years old, an IT technician. He left early and came back late, never left the kitchen a mess, and had a habit of joking about everything with a genuine lightness. Not the lightness of someone pretending life is easy, but of someone who decided not to complicate what doesn't need to be complicated. Henrique was the kind of person who makes the surrounding environment feel lighter without you being able to explain exactly how. Our friendship happened without any strategy. It happened the way the best friendships do, gradually, without either of us noticing exactly when we crossed the line from roommate to someone I truly care about. He doesn't know I'm gay. I never said anything. Not because I'm afraid of how he'd react. Honestly, Henrique has a big enough heart that it wouldn't change a thing. But because our friendship never went toward that level of depth. We talk about work, shows, messy politics, food. We sit in comfortable silence watching soccer. We split the rent and share laughs, and it works. I protect this friendship exactly because of how it works. Henrique used to talk about his father with a kind of reverence I've never seen in anyone from my generation. It wasn't that anxious way of someone who's afraid of what their father thinks. It was genuine, almost solemn. His father had built a farm from scratch, raised Henrique alone after his mother died when he was 7, and had a faith he described as the most real thing there is. A widower for 6 years, when his second wife also passed away, this time from illness. My father is the type who doesn't say much, Henrique told me once. But when he speaks, you listen. I heard that and filed it away in the back of my mind, the way we do with information about people we'll probably never meet. I never imagined that one day that man would be inside my apartment. I never imagined that one day I'd be trying not to look at him at dinner. It was a Thursday when Henrique let me know his father was coming. Farm paperwork, he said, in that way of his, explaining things as if they were obvious. A few trips to the notary's office. It'll be 2-3 days at most. Can he stay on the couch? I said yes. Of course I said yes. It was my roommate's father. It was a practical matter. There was no reason to make it complicated. What I didn't expect was the feeling I had when the apartment door opened on Friday afternoon and Mr. Antonio walked in. He occupied the space in a way I can only describe by saying he had truly arrived. He was a quiet man with measured movements, making no fuss. Even so, his physical presence suddenly made the apartment feel smaller. Like when you put a large object in a small room and suddenly realize how much space there was before. Tall. Shoulders like someone who spent their life carrying heavy things without complaining. Sun-scorched skin the way it only happens with years of working outdoors. His hair was dark, but graying at the temples, cut short. He wore a plaid shirt unbuttoned at the top, slacks, and there was a ring on his finger plain gold, without ornament. Henrique had told me his father never took it off, even after he became a widower. He greeted Henrique with a handshake and a brief hug, the kind men from the countryside exchange when they don't know exactly how to express the affection they feel, but know they need to express something. Then he looked at me. Lucas, Henrique said, introducing me. My roommate I told you about. Mr. Antonio held out his hand to me. His hand was large, the palm thick with calluses. The grip was firm, but without showiness. Not the kind of handshake that's trying to prove something. Antonio, he said. That was it. Like someone who had already given the necessary information and saw no reason to elaborate. Welcome, I said. He nodded. He turned his gaze back to the apartment. And it was at that moment I noticed the first strange thing about Mr. Antonio. He looked at things with an attention that wasn't common. That scrutiny was far from being invasive curiosity or even judgment. It seemed more like an attempt to read into things. He looked at the objects in the room, the paintings on the wall, the books stacked on the shelf, the large print of the Minas Gerais countryside I had hanging in the hallway, like someone trying to decipher something, like someone trying to understand who the person living here is before deciding anything about them. The Bible was the first thing he took out of his backpack. He placed it on the coffee table with a naturalness that made it clear it was an automatic gesture, the first thing in any new space, the anchor that made the place feel less strange. Then the rosary. It stayed in his pocket, but I saw him slip his fingers in there once and understood it was there. Dinner was for the three of us that night. Henrique talked the whole time about work, about the city, about the news since the last visit. Mr. Antonio responded with short sentences that were precise enough not to seem distant, but economical enough to make it clear he wasn't the type to use words to fill the silence. I was paying more attention than I should have. I noticed the way he held his fork, no city elegance, but no coarseness either. I noticed he didn't pick up his phone at any point. I noticed that when Henrique told a joke and they both laughed, Mr. Antonio's laugh came from a real place. Not the polite laugh of someone being cordial, but that of someone who genuinely found it funny. There was something about that man that didn't quite fit the figure Henrique had described. Or rather, it did fit, but there was more than the description captured. And I, who have always known how to observe the things others don't notice, noticed that. I didn't know what to do with it yet. It's curious how certain people cross our path and, in the blink of an eye, make it clear they carry many more layers than appearance suggests. That there's something beneath the surface waiting to be seen. On Saturday morning, Henrique had to leave. "Emergency meeting at work," he said, apologetically, already grabbing his keys. "It shouldn't take more than 3 hours. Dad, make yourself at home. Lucas is here." And he left. It was just me and Mr. Antonio. The apartment, which was already small, somehow felt even smaller. I was in the studio, the corner I'd turned into a workspace, with the large desk, the monitors, and the color swatches on the wall. A designer's work doesn't stop on the weekend. But that Saturday morning, I was staring at the screen without really seeing anything. I could hear Seu Antonio moving around the living room, the sound of pages turning. He was reading the Bible, the noise from the kitchen when he got up to get some water, the silence that returned after every sound, heavy in a way that only the silence between two people who don't really know each other yet can be. After about 40 minutes, I heard the living room chair scrape against the floor. Footsteps. Slow, heavy, but not intrusive. The kind of stride of someone who isn't in a hurry, but also isn't afraid to take up space. He appeared at the studio entrance. "May I?" he asked. His voice was low, deeper than I expected for a casual conversation. "Of course," I said. He walked in slowly. His eyes scanned the space with that characteristic focus of his. He stopped in front of a print I had on the wall, a photo of a farm at dusk, golden light, the silhouette of trees on a hill, that countryside sky that the city can never replicate. "Where is this?" he asked. "Southern Minas," I said. "I bought it at an art market. I don't know the place, but the photo stopped me in my tracks." He stared at the image for a long moment. "The light is exactly like that," he said. "At 5 in the afternoon, when the sun is going down, the farm turns exactly that color." A pause. Mine did. That went beyond the typical protocol of a guest visit. It was just a man recognizing a familiar trait in an object far from home and letting it show without meaning to. We both stood in silence, looking at the photo. Suddenly, the distance between us seemed smaller. "Is this what you do for work?" he asked later, looking at the monitors and the color swatches. "Graphic design, freelance." I explained briefly. Logos, branding materials, sometimes visual identities for small businesses. "The work of creating things," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yeah. My father was a carpenter," so Antonio said, and it wasn't a non sequitur. There was a connection he was making internally. He created things with his hands. He used to say the best part of the day was when the work stood before him and he could see what he had made. I looked at him. I don't know why that phrase touched me so much. Maybe because it was the first truly personal thing he had said since he arrived. Maybe because I understood exactly what his grandfather felt. That satisfaction of looking at something you created and knowing it didn't exist before you. "I understand that," I said. He nodded. He looked at me for a second, that reading gaze I'd already noticed, and then he said, "You have it, that look." "What look?" "The look of someone who pays attention." I didn't answer. I didn't know what to say. He left the studio shortly after and went back to the living room. But the distance that had existed between us since Friday, that calculated courtesy of two people who have known each other for less than 24 hours, had shrunk a little. I realized this and didn't know if I should be worried. The truth is, so Antonio was exactly the kind of man I had learned not to look at. Not out of dislike, the opposite. Authority figures, men of the land, the specific weight of someone carrying decades of unquestioned conviction. That kind of presence made me regress into a silence I had fought so hard to escape. And yet, that Saturday morning, I couldn't stop paying attention. The visit was supposed to end Sunday afternoon, so Antonio had booked a ride to the bus station for 4 o'clock. Henrique offered to drive him himself. We had already planned the farewell dinner, and I had spent the whole day mentally preparing for when the apartment would be ours again. It didn't happen that way. The rain started early Sunday afternoon, one of those autumn rains that arrive without warning and stay. By 2 p.m., it was clear there was no way to get to the bus station safely. The ride was cancelled. Rescheduling for Monday was the only option. Sir Antonio heard the news without changing his expression. He said it was no problem. He said he would call whoever needed to be notified and that he would stay the night. I said that was fine. We made up the sofa again, the same folded sheet, the same pillow. Henrique made pasta because that's what we had in the apartment, and because that's what he made when he wanted to cook, without thinking too much. The three of us had dinner with the rain beating against the window, and the conversation was easier than I expected. Seu Antonio had relaxed something I hadn't even realized was tense. At 10:30, Henrique yawned 3 times in a row and said he'd crash tomorrow morning if he didn't sleep right then. He disappeared into the bedroom. It was just me and Seu Antonio in the living room for a few minutes, him with his rosary beads, me pretending to check something on my phone. "Thank you for the hospitality," he said. "It was a pleasure," I said. More silence. The rain kept falling. "You can go to bed," he said. "I'll stay up for a while." There was something in his tone. It sounded less like politeness and much more like a need to be alone. I understood that and went to the bedroom. Lying in the dark, I heard the TV stay on for a while, then turn off. I heard him moving through the kitchen, getting water, maybe. I heard the silence that settled afterward. I fell asleep, without being able to tell the exact time. What I couldn't see from that room, was that the Bible was open on the coffee table when I turned off the light. And when I woke up in the middle of the night and went to the bathroom, it was still open in the same spot. and Mr. Antonio was stretched out on the sofa with his eyes closed. I went back to the room without thinking much about it. Or at least I tried to, because that scene stayed somewhere on the edge of my consciousness. The open Bible, the still pages. A person who is sleeping doesn't leave a light on for the Bible. A person who is sleeping wasn't reading before bed at 3 a.m. What was he doing awake in the middle of the night? With no answers, I fell asleep again, and this time in a heavy sleep. Until I woke up suddenly, turned my head, and saw him there. I'm going to tell you what actually happened that night. Not the way I told it at the beginning. The condensed version, the 2-second impact. I'm going to tell you everything, because now you know who these people are. You know what existed between them before that moment, and you need to feel the weight of every second. I woke up and turned my head, and he was there. But this time I won't cut the scene. He was in my bedroom doorway, and the sliver of light from the hallway, that orange light coming from the street through the living room window, illuminated the left side of his face, his shoulders, one of his hands. I could see that his right hand was closed and open at the same time, fingers moving slowly. And then I realized it was the rosary. He was holding the rosary. Our eyes met. I was lying on my side, wide awake. That sudden and total vigilance that only happens when something in your nervous system decides that the danger justifies the cost. But there was no danger. There was a man standing in my bedroom doorway at 3 a.m, looking at me, and both of us knew that both of us were awake. He didn't run away. That's what matters most in this scene, and it took me days to understand why. Any other explanation, disorientation, sleepwalking, coincidence, would have produced an immediate retreat when our eyes met. Anyone doing something innocent would have apologized and left. He stayed. For how long? I don't know. I know it was long enough to not be an accident, long enough to be a decision. On his face, I couldn't read anger. I couldn't read threat. What I could read, and what I tried for days to convince myself I had made up, was something much more raw than that. It was the face of someone looking at something they shouldn't, knowing they shouldn't, and unable to stop. It was recognition. My breath caught in my throat, and every muscle in my body stiffened under the sheet. And then, slowly, like someone detaching themselves from something, he turned away. He didn't run. He didn't hide. He turned like someone finishing something and knowing they need to go. His steps were slow in the dark hallway, followed by the sound of the sofa taking the weight of his body. Silence. I stared at the ceiling until the sun came up. If only it were easy to stay awake at night, trying to label the indescribable. We try to organize what we've just experienced into sentences, but the words come out all crooked and always insufficient. That's how I felt. With the whole night ahead of me, and the weight of that look still as real as physics, I built up all the explanations. He went to the bathroom and got lost in the dark apartment. But the bathroom was on the opposite side of the hallway, and he was facing my room, not with his back to it. He woke up disoriented, but his eyes weren't the eyes of someone disoriented. They were the eyes of someone who was all too present. He wanted to say something. Maybe. But he didn't. What remained was the silence. And within the silence, the only thing I couldn't dismiss. Mr. Antonio, a man of God, my best friend's father, 54 years of a life built in a specific direction, had stood in my bedroom doorway in the middle of the night with a rosary in his hand, and a look I recognized because I had already felt it inside myself. It's not easy to write this. It's not easy to say that I understood what was in his eyes, because I myself carried something I hadn't yet fully named. That the disturbance I felt wasn't just the strangeness of something unexpected. It was the disturbance of seeing yourself in a mirror at a moment when you weren't expecting a mirror. When the sun came through the window and the birds started up outside, I heard the sound of Mr. Antonio getting up from the sofa. Soon after, I heard the kitchen faucet. The smell of brewing coffee filled the air, and life moved on, as life insists on doing, with all its brutal normalcy. Breakfast was a performance, not the exaggerated performance of someone trying to hide something. That would be easier to detect. It was the subtle performance of two adults who know that the only acceptable currency at breakfast is normalcy, and who are going to pay that price without hesitation. Mr. Antonio was standing in the kitchen when I walked in. He had made coffee. He had sliced bread. He was facing away from me and didn't turn around immediately. He made a calculated pause, like someone who needs to ensure their expression is under control before facing the other. "Good morning," he said. "Good morning," I said. His eyes looked at me for a moment, and then went to the window, to the coffee, to anything that wasn't me. The rigidity had returned. It was a different posture than Friday's, a tension that exuded less natural distance and much more of a forced block, hurriedly erected to contain whatever it was. Henrique woke up in a good mood, as always. He walked into the kitchen talking about how the weather had cleared up, about lunch, and about whether his father would miss his next bus too. His carefree tone was almost cruel in that context, not out of malice, but out of pure innocence. He didn't see a thing, and maybe there was nothing to see. Maybe I'd made half of it up. But Mr. Antonio never looked at me directly during that breakfast. He looked at his son. He looked at the window. He looked at his cup. Once, when he had to pass by me to grab something from the fridge, he carefully steered clear to avoid any contact. That calculated avoidance was what convinced me I hadn't made anything up. They went to the living room while I washed the dishes. I heard Henrique making plans for the day, taking his father to the notary's office in the morning and the bus station in the afternoon. The tone was one of family, of routine, the kind of conversation that happens between a father and son who love each other but don't truly know each other. When it was time to leave, Mr. Antonio grabbed his backpack from the sofa, tightened his wedding ring with his thumb, a gesture I realized was automatic, perhaps a habit, and walked toward the door. He stopped in front of me. "It was a pleasure," he said. "Thank you." He held out his hand. I took it, and he held on. A fraction of a second longer than any formal handshake would justify. He didn't squeeze harder, didn't do anything that could be called a gesture, but he held on, for that extra second that made all the difference between a greeting and a communication. Then he let go. He left. The door closed. I stood there staring at my own hand. If you think I'm overreacting, that an extra second is too small to carry so much weight, I understand. But there are moments when what remains unsaid is so loud that anything, no matter how small, becomes the only way the truth can find room to breathe. That handshake was the only thing he could do, and he did it. I spent the rest of the day waiting for I didn't know what. 2 days later, the doorbell rang. Henrique was at work. It was Tuesday, around 2 in the afternoon. I was in the middle of a project when the intercom buzzed. I went down to the lobby thinking it was a delivery. It was Mr. Antonio, wearing slacks and a shirt, with the same backpack he'd carried before on his shoulder, and that look I already knew how to recognize. That look that is completely present, but trying to pretend it isn't. I didn't say anything for a second. "I forgot something," he said. His voice was steady. He'd prepared that line. I knew it. "A document. I think I left it on the sofa. Come in," I said. We both knew he hadn't forgotten anything on the sofa, and we both knew that the other knew. But there was a necessary ritual here, a practical fiction that allowed the conversation to begin, and I wasn't going to be the one to break it. He came in, looked at the sofa. Obviously, there was nothing there. He stood for a moment, not knowing where to go. "Want some coffee?" I asked. "Yes, please." I went to the kitchen. I heard his footsteps following me, not into the kitchen, but to the entrance of the studio, where he stood looking at the photo of the Minas countryside again. When I brought the coffee, he was sitting on the sofa with his hands in his lap. The rosary was out this time, visible, his fingers moving slowly over the beads. I sat in the armchair. We sat in silence for a moment that would have been uncomfortable with anyone else, but with Mr. Antonio, it was different. He didn't use silence to escape. He used it to think. I had learned that about him in 3 days. "Did you sleep well?" he asked. It was a polite question. It was also the only question we both knew wasn't just being polite. "Not really," I said. He looked at me, and then he looked at his hands. "I need to apologize to you," he said. His voice sounded strained, the expected stumble of someone who rarely allows themselves to unlock that kind of feeling. That night, it wasn't right. "You don't need to apologize for that," I said. "I do." A pause. "I went there to see you. I wasn't lost. I wasn't disoriented." His eyes went to the window. I stayed awake with the Bible in my hand trying to ask for clarity, and the clarity that came wasn't the one I asked for. I didn't say anything, because there was more coming. I could feel it. "I have a life," he said, and the tone of his voice, heavy with exhaustion, not resistance, broke something inside me. "I have land. I have a son. I have a community. I have faith. I have 54 years of something built in one direction." "I know," I said. "It's not that I never—" he began, then stopped. He started again. "It's not the first time I've felt something that doesn't fit where it's supposed to, but I've learned not to look at it head on." The room was quiet. Outside, the noise of the street, cars, a child shouting in the distance, ordinary life completely oblivious to what was happening in there. "Why did you come back?" I asked. He looked at me for a long moment. "I needed to understand what you saw," he said. And in that sentence, that specific sentence, was everything. It wasn't an explanation, not a confession yet. It was the first time he acknowledged, out loud, that there was something to understand. I held on to that sentence inside and waited. There was a long silence after that. A silence free of awkwardness, typical of someone standing before a barrier too large to be torn down in a hurry. Mr. Antonio was looking at the rosary in his hands. I was looking at him. "You can ask me," I said. "Anything." He looked up. "Are you?" he began, and stopped. "I am," I said, without needing the full question. He nodded slowly, like someone who had just confirmed something they already sensed deep down, but needed to hear, a kind of silent alignment. The missing piece of the puzzle clicking into place in the silence. "What's it like?" he asked, and the question was so direct, so devoid of judgment, that it caught me completely off guard. "What's what like?" "Not having to pretend." I stared at him for a moment. You'll understand why that question affected me so much when I tell you it didn't come from a place of curiosity about someone else. It came from someone looking at an option they had never allowed themselves to consider and asking what it's like to exist on the other side of it. "It's a process," I said carefully. "It doesn't happen all at once. You unlearn the fear bit by bit, and there are parts that never completely unlearn it. But you don't hide." "No," Not anymore. He fell silent. His fingers stopped moving over the rosary beads. I spent my whole life, he said. And this time he didn't stop. He let the sentence flow, slowly, like someone carrying a weight down a long road and finally beginning to set it down. I spent my whole life convinced that certain things were temptation. That what God wants is different from what we feel sometimes. That faith is exactly that, acting against what you feel when what you feel is wrong. And now? I asked. Now I don't know, he said. He looked at the wedding ring on his finger. I loved my wife. That was real. The life I built is real. Faith is real. A pause. And this is also real. And I don't know what to do with two real things that don't fit into the same life. It was the most honest confession I had heard from anyone in a long time. Not because he used the easy words, he didn't. He hadn't said, I'm gay, or I'm attracted to men, or any of the phrases that have become shortcuts for this conversation. He had revealed something much denser. The recognition of a real feeling throbbing inside, and the total absence of an instruction manual to deal with it. You don't need to know what to do right now, I said. But I need something. His eyes met mine. There was exhaustion there, not from lack of sleep, but from decades of carrying something you chose not to look at. I spent this whole early morning asking God to show me the way, and the way that appeared led back to your door. I don't know how to describe what I felt at that moment without making it seem small. There was a responsibility there that I hadn't asked for. A 54-year-old man, with an entire life built around a version of himself that was cracking for the first time, had come back to my door because he didn't know how to pretend anymore. And I was gay. And I was his son's friend. And I was the most wrong and the most right person in the world to be in this conversation at the same time. Antonio, I said, and it was the first time I used his name without the Mr. in front, and we both realized it at the same time. What you felt earlier this morning isn't weakness. It's not a mistake. It's you. He closed his eyes. I know this doesn't solve anything for you, I continued. I know you have a life that doesn't easily accommodate a transformation. I'm not telling you what to do with this. I'm just telling you that what you felt has a name, and that name isn't wrong. We sat in silence. Then he said very softly, I saw you, in that room, and you saw me. I saw you, I said. It was the first time someone saw me like that. There was no way to respond to that with words, so I didn't respond with words. I stayed there. I didn't run. I didn't get up. I didn't change the subject. I didn't pretend I hadn't heard. I simply remained present with what he had said, in the way that is sometimes the only thing we can offer another person to be there, completely, without needing to fix anything. Have you ever been in one of those moments, where the most important thing you could do was simply not walk away? He opened his eyes after a while. He wasn't crying. He wasn't the kind of man who lets that show easily. But there was something different in his face. Like when you put down a weight you've been carrying for so long, you didn't even realize you were carrying it anymore. I don't know what this means for my life, he said. You don't have to know today. But something changed. Yes, I said. It did. And both things were true. We talked for another hour. Not about feelings. What needed to be said in that direction had already been said. We talked about other things, about the farm, about Henrique, about what it means to have built a life in a place while carrying a part of yourself that place will never understand. Falamos sobre fé, de jeito que eu não esperava conseguir com ele. Eu não sou religioso, mas ouvi o que ele tinha para dizer sobre isso, sem tentar desfazer a crença, porque a crença dele era real e eu respeito o que é real. There was something different about this conversation. Not the calculated coldness of breakfast, not the formality of the first day. It was the conversation of two adults who had gone through something difficult and come out the other side without getting hurt. Henrique can't know, he said at some point. It wasn't a request, it was a statement. I understood why, and it wasn't cowardice. It was protection of his son, of the relationship they had, of a world that wasn't ready for this conversation yet. I won't say anything to Henrique, I said. About me, but about you, he said. You should tell him. He would understand. I looked at him, surprised. Henrique isn't the father he thinks he is, Mr. Antonio said, with a seriousness that carried the weight of self-knowledge. But he's the son I needed to have. He'll understand you. I held on to that. There was a sweet and painful irony in the fact that this man, who had just named something he'd never named in his life, who still didn't know what he was going to do with it, was encouraging me to be more honest than I had been with his son. Will you be okay? I asked, as he stood up to leave. He grabbed his backpack. He looked around the room, at the Bible left on the table, at the sofa where he had slept, at the apartment he was about to leave again. I don't know, he said, with total honesty. But I'm leaving differently. That was the most complete truth he could give me. At the door, the goodbye wasn't a handshake. It was a look, lingering, direct, without the layers of restraint both had carried until now. A look that said, I saw you, you saw me, this happened, and there's no undoing it. Finally, he went on his way. I closed the door and stood in the hallway for a while. There are situations where life presents you with something that doesn't fit into the categories you've prepared. It's not a villain, it's not a hero, it's a whole, complex human being, carrying decades of contradiction with a dignity that's hard not to respect. Mr. Antonio was 54 years old, a wedding ring on his finger, a rosary in his pocket, a faith he still didn't know how to reconcile with who he was. I didn't fall in love with him, but I saw him. And that is, sometimes, the most intimate act there is. What happened next? The truth is, I don't know how this story ends. I know Mr. Antonio went back to the farm. I know Henrique called me the following week, saying his father had sounded different on the phone. Quieter, but more present. I know I spent days trying to process what that week had done to me. The stakes were real. The obstacles were real. Religion, family, distance. These aren't things that just disappear because a conversation happened. Antonio's life was an entire structure, and a single crack doesn't destroy a structure. But a crack is the first thing light needs to find its way in. There's something that week taught me about myself that I needed to learn. I had very carefully built a life that was honest. I was out to the people who mattered. I'd found peace with who I was, and I'd left behind the silence of the rural town where I grew up. And it was all real. The authenticity was real. The growth was real. But there was one thing I still did that I hadn't realized I was doing. I protected myself from feeling inconvenient things. I'd learned not to look at certain men, not to allow myself to feel anything in directions that would complicate my life. And this protection worked so well, it had become automatic, a discreet armor I didn't even know I was wearing. Mr. Antonio's gaze that dawn, that moment at the bedroom door, stripped that armor away. Not because I fell in love with an impossible man, but because it forced me to stop pretending certain things don't exist just because it's inconvenient for them to exist. It forced me to stand before something real, complicated, with no clean solution, and not run away. There are moments that divide life into a before and after. Not all of them are dramatic. Not all of them have a resolution. Some are as simple as a look in the dark at 3 in the morning that lasts seconds longer than it should. I woke up that dawn and found a man standing at my bedroom door. There was no threat there. There was truth. His and mine, if I had the courage to look. I did. And that changed something I didn't know needed to change. Have you ever experienced a moment like that? That instant when life offers you a mirror you didn't ask for, and you decide, in a fraction of a second, if you're actually going to look or if you'll turn away. It doesn't have to involve someone else. It doesn't have to be a dramatic situation. It could be a conversation, a silence, a tiny detail that somehow reveals something you'd kept hidden. If you've lived through this, if there's a moment that divides your life into before and after, I want to hear about it. Leave it in the comments. Tell me what changed when you stopped pretending you hadn't seen it. And if this story made you feel something, if it touched you in any way, a like already tells me that. It helps me keep bringing stories that treat people as whole, as complex, as deserving of the truth. You don't have to be perfect all the time to deserve to be seen. And that's what these stories are about. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. There are stories like this every week. Stories that don't have easy answers, that don't resolve everything in the end, but that are real. I'm Lucas. I'm 26 years old. And it was a look in the dark that taught me that the bravest thing we can do is not look away. Until next time. Much love, everyone.